Derek and I arrived at the Oswego River about 9:30 p.m. and threw lures for quite a few hours before we slept for the night and landed about 6, 7 salmon, lost a few in the meantime, but all in all, it was a pretty slow night with the low water. So when the sun came out, I ran up and grabbed some eggs and the floats, started doing a little drift fishing, and sure enough, hooked up about the second cast. I ran up to the car and grabbed the camera, came back down, and Derek was hooked up on his second cast. Ended up fighting this king for a few minutes here. As you can see, the water's flowing pretty slowly, so the eggs that were cured were giving off plenty of scent. Drives the salmon crazy. This crazy old man here doesn't know how to net a fish, but every time we hooked one, he came running with the net, even though we had one. Works a lot better than they do on
yeah.
fish, by the way. It's a nice little male. Derek got maybe 14, 15 pounds at best. But as you can see, the hook is way down in the throat. Yep, there it is. I did take a picture of this fish on my iPhone, but I have no idea where it went. This was an interesting fish. Derek actually looked up and was talking to me. Turns around, and the quote of the day was, "Where'd my bobber go?" Well, the answer was under the water. And he was locked up with this big fat hen. Actually spent quite a while fighting it, so in the meantime, I continued fishing. I have no idea why he flinched there. I thought maybe he passed out and woke up all of a sudden. First time I tried netting this fish, it didn't work out too well. I practically dropped the net right on its head. That never happens. But as you can see, the net and the technique does work pretty well. You just have to wait until the fish gets most of its weight inside the net. That way, when you lift it up, it doesn't turn sideways.
There we go. Oh yeah, dude, that's
Another
a
fat fish. There we go. We fished upriver for a little bit while in some pocket water. It slowed down in the harbor when the sun came out, and ended up walking up the wall and crossing out onto the middle wall and headed down just so we could get away from the guys because there was no one out there fishing. And it didn't take too long until we started hooking up the salmon, just drifting along that wall there in the slower water. There you can see the bait of choice. I just thought this was a cool shot with the spool on the reel turning slowly. It wasn't too packed that day, but there were still plenty of guys on the other side snagging fish, and to my surprise, there were about a half dozen guys float fishing as well. So it wasn't too bad for a Tuesday on the Oswego River. You'll see a knot in my line here where I have two pieces tied together. That actually comes back to bite me in the butt a little bit later on. I was shaking pretty bad right there. I like to reef on the salmon, that way I can land them pretty quickly, and it just goes to show how much pressure you can put on these fish, and you can't budge them sometimes. Derek kept trying to tail these salmon, but he can never keep a hold of them. No offense. It's a nice fish. We couldn't get him up, so every time we get him up to the wall, we just pop the hook out and wish him well. At this point, I lost pretty much all my line except for maybe 50, 60 yards, so every time I'd hook one, I have to run down the wall as far as I could, just so I had a little bit more on my reel and didn't have to worry about getting spooled. I usually carry some backup line, but not this time. The car is only about 100 yards from there, but it's on the other side of the river, and that is where the extra line was. So this spot turned on as the day went along. Some nice salmon on the surface. Again, notice how every fish is coming in. Fair hooked in the mouth. They definitely love the pot ski, borax and fire.
I had a phase
Cured
where
salmon
when I would,
eggs. There we go.
there's a fish.
He was tapping it, dropped it,
Look at
picked
him
it back
tapping
up,
it. He's just tapping it.
hooked up,
Oh yeah.
and he popped off.
Oh no.
That just goes to show how much line I had left. Hardly any. My drift ended when I reached the end of my spool. Derek's talking to me, and I told him his float was down. He didn't reel too fast. That was his first mistake. His second mistake right there, when you see his rod start to shake from the head shakes, he never pulled back. I don't know what he was thinking, but for his first time, he was doing pretty damn well, so I didn't get on his case too much.
Bitch.
He's fighting his fish. I decided to put on some fresh bait. There, it popped off. This was the last piece of bait of the day. Derek just busted off. That was the last chunk we had. First drift. There's one playing with it. Float went down twice. Ended up reeling up right here to see if he was on there, but unfortunately he had dropped it. So 3 casts later, this was the last one. Very end of my drift. There he is. And it was strange because usually as soon as you hook them, they start shaking their heads, but for some reason that tail out, every time you'd hook them, they'd just sit there in the bottom for about 4 or 5 seconds before they'd shake their head.
On the last piece of bait.
Guy on the other side of the river actually hooked up with my line at this point. I really didn't think I'd land the fish, but he was okay. Left his bail open the whole time, gave me some slack.
Last piece of bait, last cast of the day.
Was just goofing off a little bit about the last cast of the day,
Right
last piece of
too,
bait.
Right at the end, you're about to reel in too.
Can't really get much better than that.
He's clear because he's got that thick little line.
Right after we landed this
Oh, he's
fish,
still on.
we walked up the wall to cross back over to the other side to leave, and as soon as we got to the top of the middle wall, the siren sounded that they were raising the water. And I really wish we had another bag of bait because we would have definitely stayed. These fish would have went crazy. It was a little slow of a shot. Yeah, it was a good day. I mean, we were hooking a fish about every 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the most. And it would have been nice to fish when that water came up because it would have been virtually every cast. But hey, you go through a gallon of eggs in a day, that's not too shabby.
You might still be on, but our line's
Float
off.
fishing for salmon.
Yeah.